I had Google issues as ever. These things never go as smoothly as you would hope, but here we are. So thank you all for turning up to the Saiku Enterprise launch event. I'm going to run through various aspects of the Saiku Enterprise system and give everyone an idea as to how we're going to develop Saiku in the future and the roadmap ahead. So here we go. Hopefully everyone can see my slides. So for those of you who don't know about Saiku, I'm going to give a bit of a brief history. It was founded in 2008 by me, myself, Tom Barber, and Paul Stolberger. The initial user interface design was done by Prashant Raju and Mark Cahill, who were kind enough to offer their services. There's over 60 contributors to the core code over the years, and we've got 18,000 regular users. So that's the Saiku stack. A bit about Meteorite BI. So I run a company called Meteorite BI. We're an independent business intelligence consultancy and development shop for data analytics type tools. And we've done the guiding and the driving behind Saiku development over the years with Paul on board, helping develop Saiku and move it forward. Let's drop out of that second. So there's a couple of aspects to the latest round of Saiku releases. The first thing being that Saiku 3 has been released. So this is relevant to the community version as well as the enterprise version. And a few of the things that are new in Saiku 3. We've done a lot of work in improving the performance both of the server and the libraries that we communicate with. So there's faster query response times, much improved SQL generation and sensibleness behind the scenes. Similarly, we've improved the rendering speed and user interface, so it shouldn't bog down when you've got large tables visible on the screen. We've tweaked the PDF output to make it match more what you can see on the screen, and there's cluster support for sharing sessions across large-scale deployments. So if you want a multi-server deployment, you can now share sessions transparently with Saiku. Which brings me on to the Saiku Enterprise stack. And so obviously key to Saiku Enterprise is what we're going to provide, how we're going to provide it, and how we're going to make it worthwhile for people to upgrade to the Saiku Enterprise stack. So the first thing we are shipping is a schema designer for the data sources. So over the years, people have used Schema Workbench and Notepad and text editors to design their Mondrian schemas. So we're taking this to another level, and we are going to ship an embedded drag and drop schema designer, mostly so it allows people who have data sets that they want to analyze to get started quickly. This will enable people to hook up to their database, drag some stuff around, and then save a schema to the server and instantly analyze their data, rather than having to download software, write some code, upload it to a server, and then deploy and run it. We are also going to ship a Mongo interface and some designer stuff around that. So alongside the traditional SQL JDBC connections, we're also providing connectivity to the MongoDB database. It's obviously up and coming, and there's an awful lot of press around it, and it allows people to analyze their data directly from inside Mongo without having to extract it to a database and then write queries and stuff over that. So you can run OLAP analysis directly over Mongo itself. Next up, we've got cluster support. So as I mentioned earlier, Saiku now supports clustering. So we'll support your servers for cluster management and distribution on a wide-scale network. And obviously, key to a commercial offering, we offer different levels of support depending on how mission critical your Saiku installation is. So both just UK hours or 24/7, 365 for more important distributions. So I figure at this point it's probably a good idea to run through Saiku. So let me just refresh that. So Saiku 3, there's an awful lot that's changed under the hood as opposed to an awful lot of visible stuff. We're making changes for the future, so there's an awful lot of back-end changes that will allow us to add more features going forward, the stuff that people have always been asking for and we've had to put on the back burner because it's been tricky to sort out. So Saiku 3 looks an awful lot like Saiku 2. There's a couple of big differences though. We have a new repository in the back end as opposed to just storing files directly on a file system. We now use Jackrabbit content repository to store files in the back end and the metadata that goes with them. So this brings on a new set of issues with regards to how do people access the files, edit the files, manipulate them, because before people would just use a file manager to go and find them on the network. So we've written the admin console. Now there's an admin console in CE and E. There's a few differences between the two, but they largely provide access to the repository, to the data sources, that before you would have to, again, use Notepad to create a data source that Saiku would then understand. So we're trying to provide services to clients that don't want to have to hack around in the back end. They want to be able to add data sources quickly and easily and manipulate the data sources from within the web browser, because after all, we're a web-based tool. So the less you have to do in the back end, the better. So in the front end now, there's the ability to create a data source. You can obviously name it and type in URLs, fill in the details. The details are the same as you would have previously. It's just in a slightly more convenient manner. So you can then hit save and it will save it to the repository, and you can come back later and your data source will be there. For those of you that would like to customize these things, there's always the advanced box. So you can paste data sources that are in the same format as the previous data sources directly into the box. And again, that will save them to repositories. So you can still add old style handwritten data sources. You just do it through the admin console. Similarly with schemas, Mondrian schemas, you select the schema and upload it and give it a name, and it will save it to the repository. And then if we look in the repository viewer, so before this would just look at the file system in Tomcat and return the directories and the folder structure within it. Now, obviously, it talks to the Jackrabbit repository. The changes we've made here is when a new user, when you add a new user to the system, or if a new user appears from a third-party authentication mechanism, it will create a home folder for that user, which is private to that user and allows users to just create reports and save them to their own folder, as opposed to everything getting chucked into a big global folder or a system administrator having to maintain this manually. So there's a few refinements to the repository that allow people to just organize their files better. The big changes to the back end, for those of you who understand Mondrian and the Mondrian schemas, there's now it now runs Mondrian 4. So a lot of people have been asking about the upgrade path. Luckily, Mondrian 4 understands Mondrian 3 schemas, so you shouldn't have any issues running your old schemas in Mondrian 4. And for those of you who are new to Saiku or writing new cubes, then there's the new Mondrian 4 schema definition that you can find the documentation for on the Pento website. And similarly, our Saiku schema editor will output Mondrian 4 style schemas to the repository. So let me click in. So the user interface itself hasn't seen a great deal of changes. There's been some refinement to the drop zones and also the way it generates the MDX query. So if I start a simple query like this one, I can then select my cube, drop my measures. So the measures now have a distinct drop box. We figured it just made life easier for people to understand where to put their measures, because before you would have to keep measures together but select an axis and it confused people. So we're putting measures into a measures drop box, and then, it's a good one. And then on the rows or rows and columns, you can then put a dimension. So the change here is you used to have a dimension on both rows and columns to make Saiku render a query. Now all you have to do is put one on rows and measures in the measures box, and it will work, which does make life easier for some of the more simple queries that people want to fire off. It just makes less clicks and easier to get to your results. But of course, you can still chuck queries onto the dimensions onto the columns. It will still work in exactly the same way that you are used to. And then within the drop-down box, there's still the filters and the limits and the general bits and pieces that allow you to fine-tune your query, and the reasonably recently added totals. So it's something that's obviously been asked for years and years and years, and we've never come up with a sensible way of doing it, but it was committed, and we now have the ability to display accurate totals on the screen, which take into account when members aren't visible and so on and so on. And we still have the spark lines and the basic statistics. So there's a multitude of ways of being able to display your data in a tabular format. And of course, there's still all the charts that come from the great CCC charting library. So in terms of charting, it's not changed too much yet. This is something that we're going to look at in the roadmap. But the charts are still here. For those of you who haven't come across the zoomable charts, this is a useful feature for people that want to drill into certain aspects of the data. So you can obviously start with a query that takes in an awful lot of data over a period of time and drill down into a certain part of the chart that you're interested in without having to rerun the query, which does make life easier when it comes down to figuring out what you want to look at. So back to why choose Saiku. There's a multitude of reasons why people choose Saiku and continue to choose Saiku over the other OLAP analysis tools that are out there. Saiku has always been lightweight and performant. We run well on low resource machines and still provide quick results. We don't have masses of RAM usage. Of course, if you have thousands of users, that would be different. But for the average BI installation, we find that you don't have to have tens of gigabytes of RAM to get Saiku to perform at an optimal level. It will generally run on reasonably low resource machines and run pretty well. One of the main reasons for that is the fact that we don't have any heavyweight toolkits behind the back end, and we generally don't have much legacy stuff to support, so it keeps us lightweight and pretty agile. Going on to the flexibility side of things, obviously Saiku is designed, for those of you who don't know, around a bunch of standard languages that allow people to manipulate Saiku in a multitude of ways to make their lives easier. So the front end is entirely HTML and JavaScript, for example. So if you want to if you want to adjust your user interface to match corporate branding, or you have just a completely different way of wanting to be able to analyze your data, then all you have to do is change HTML and JavaScript. You don't have to mess around compiling files and checking stuff out. You can just literally change the code in the script and refresh your browser and it will change. So it makes life a lot easier to embed Saiku into a bunch of different platforms, which takes me on to embeddability. So a lot of clients that we deal with have a use case where they want to be able to provide analytics to users without having to write an entire stack themselves. And Saiku is obviously quite a good match for use cases like that, because it allows users to embed analytics directly into web frameworks or even fact client frameworks using Saiku and the Saiku server. Because we use REST-based technology, we communicate over normal internet protocols. It means that people can embed Saiku in different backends and display the results to end users. So a good example of that is the UN. So the UN have been working on this one for a few years, but they, whilst it doesn't look like it, behind the scenes, it's entirely powered by Saiku. When a user changes the filter settings on the left-hand side, then it changes the query that Saiku has generated, passes it back to Saiku server. The Saiku server then returns the results, which is then displayed in a custom table. So whilst Saiku ships with a user interface that users are used to and understand, if you have a distinct use case, there's no reason why you have to stick with the access drop zones and the standard stuff. You can plug the Saiku server into virtually any user interface that you so desire, as this proves. For anyone who wants to see that further, you can obviously visit the FAO website and have a play around. So the other good aspect to Saiku, especially Saiku 3, is its versatility and our ability to be able to plug into a bunch of different data sources. So Mondrian has over the years supported a number of different JDBC supported databases: SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, Vectorwise, pretty much you name it in terms of databases, it is supported. But it hasn't until recently supported being able to query NoSQL data sources, which is obviously becoming more and more relevant in the modern age. The ability to talk to Mongo, to be able to talk to Elasticsearch, be able to talk to Hadoop. This is becoming more and more useful for people to be able to run analysis over these servers in real time without having to extract the data and put it elsewhere. So going back to my demo here, if I look at the other cube, hold on a second. What we've got here is Saiku running directly over Hadoop. There's an interface layer called Apache Phoenix. which provides SQL services to allow us to run interactive analysis directly over Hadoop datasets. This obviously gives people the ability to analyze an awful lot more data, an awful lot more over a vast, much larger period of time, and still be able to return results that's in a reasonably quick time frame. Now, when people are running analysis over NoSQL data stores, they have to appreciate that obviously there's an awful lot more data, there's an awful lot more processing to be done. So the performance won't be the same as if you're running Saiku over an analytical data set where you would get split-second results and display them on the screen in next to no time. It does take a little bit longer, but this can be tuned and it will improve as the technology that is in the back end improves, so will the response time. So when Hive was first introduced, the query response time was so slow that no one ever bothered. But in the last 6 to 12 months, with the advent of Impala and now Apache Phoenix and various other bits and pieces, the query response time has become acceptable so much that users can now run analysis directly on the data sets without having to extract it to data warehouses. So combining data warehouses and NoSQL data stores offers a great deal more flexibility in what you want to report on. You might have a few analytical data warehouses that provide a snapshot view or an aggregated view of an awful lot of data, which users can click on and will be able to interact with very, very quickly. You may also have a slightly larger view that runs directly over Hadoop or Google BigQuery or similar, that allows users to see a much greater amount of data and analyze a much greater amount of data, but just take a little bit longer just to get to that result. So obviously we're here to discuss Saiku Enterprise, and we appreciate that we have to charge people for it because we need to provide support. And so Saiku Enterprise, we're pricing initially at $300 per user per year for the silver edition. For the gold edition, then you're looking at $480. We think that this price point will offer the ability for users to help the Saiku software stack build. It will allow us to improve and invest money back into Saiku, but also at a price point which allows people to buy Saiku without having to worry about the astronomical licensing overheads that other traditional BI tools might charge. And so for the small businesses, we're quite happy to charge on a per user basis because we understand that you might not have 1,000 users wanting to use Saiku. Similarly, we're also going to sell unlimited user licenses because we also appreciate that there's companies out there who might want to offer Saiku Enterprise to users who just sort of drive-by analysis. If it's on a public website, a user might come along and just use Saiku once and disappear. And so providing per user licensing wouldn't work, but also unlimited user licensing will help figure out that need. So finally, sort of getting onto the Saiku Enterprise roadmap. So Saiku Enterprise is currently finishing off the development of the back end and the user interface bits and pieces. It will be available for download from next Wednesday. There's obviously going to be trial licenses and development licenses, so people that want to play around with it can get a feel for Saiku Enterprise and how it works and what you get for your money. along that, obviously, people also want to know the roadmap, because adding just a schema designer and Mongo interface isn't necessarily a deal clincher. So looking at Saiku Enterprise going forward, we're certainly looking to enhance the user interface, the ability for people to be able to customize the user interface to match their corporate colors, corporate logos, corporate branding has always been something that we've been wanting to do, because we appreciate that Saiku is often embedded within internet portals or wikis and similar stuff. So being able to blend it in with the existing system will obviously allow people to make it look a bit more corporate, and it saves people having to, again, change stuff that's on the back end. They'll be able to upload packages to the server and just get it to change it that way. And again, in the admin console, obviously we're in our first iteration of the admin console. So going forward, we are going to provide the ability to change security settings and other things that otherwise you would end up changing XML files in the back end. We like web-based tools. We like making life easy for people. So if they can change the security settings, configure the LDAP server or whatever from within the admin console, then that's much more preferable to having someone having to get access to the server, change an XML file, restart the server. You know, we like to make people's lives easy. That is why Saiku was invented in the first place. We wanted to make life easier than understanding JPivot. So we're still continuing on that mission, and we'll get there eventually. Another thing that's obviously asked for quite often, and we haven't yet built, is dashboarding interface. So we've been through a couple of prototypes to this, and it'll be coming real soon. The dashboards, or at least the ability to display multiple reports in one window, has been asked for years. It's never really been a sensible thing to do until the advent of the Saiku 3 query model that is far more adept at dealing with filtering. So that sort of takes me on to the next one, where time-based filtering. Until now, you've not been able to do any time-based filtering with Saiku. So if you want to see the last month's sales figure, you have to select the month itself. You can't just tell it to pick current date minus 1 month or whatever, periods to date. It doesn't work. So in Saiku 3.1, we're going to look at bringing time-based filtering to the user interface, along with user-defined calculated members. They're closely linked, and there's something that people have been asking for a long time: the ability to define calculated members in the user interface instead of just in the schema. And, you know, month-to-date, year-to-date type filtering for time-based dimensions. Once that's in place, it will pave the way to dashboards, because dashboards are normally time-based in some respect. And so if you have a dashboard where you have to set the date every time you go into it, it's a bit silly. So time-based filtering sort of paves the way for dashboards, so that will be coming pretty soon. And as with all the tools, the analytical tool sets, we're always looking to enhance our visualizations. So currently we use the CCC charting. There's an awful lot of interest in the D3 charting engine, so we'll be looking at doing some stuff with that, and just generally bringing more charting options to Saiku so people can visualize their data in different ways. And then finally, there is the enhanced connectivity. So Saiku Enterprise currently will support JDBC connections, Mongo connections, and Hadoop. Going forward, we'll be looking to extend the Hadoop connections as well. So not just using Phoenix, but obviously Impala and Spark and Shark, because that gives people with different preferences the ability to still use Saiku over Hadoop, just using their favorite methodology of getting the data out. We're looking at support for Google BigQuery, because we appreciate that using an analytical database like Google BigQuery allows people to store an awful lot more data than they would ordinarily store and return queries pretty quickly. So that's quite important to us. Cassandra. Obviously, Cassandra has a very large following, and it's growing all the time. Luckily, Spark has a Cassandra mechanism for querying Cassandra, so we'll be doing Cassandra support. Solar Elasticsearch will be coming shortly, and also SQL over APIs. With the advent of an awful lot of data being sent over RESTful APIs, we've had a few projects where it's made sense to be able to run SQL queries directly over the API, querying the API at the far end, transforming the data into a result set, and then displaying it within Saiku. So we're going to look to provide support and configuration tools to allow you to directly interact with web-based APIs without having to download the data first or store it in a temporary file. So that's pretty much the Saiku Enterprise stack and the roadmap. So like I said, going forward, we're looking to release it. The initial beta release will be going live in a week's time, sorry, on next Wednesday. And then also, once that's been released, it'll go to public beta. We'll obviously support it through the help desk. And then going forward, we'll have probably a second beta release and then a general availability release coming shortly after that. So I apologize for coming late. Oh, there's a question about Saiku reporting, which is a good one. So obviously there's more than one way of being able to analyze your data, and the Pento metadata layer has often been used as a way to generate row-level reports as opposed to analytical reports. There is a tool out there called Saiku Reporting that was written by Marius, and he started it, and it mostly worked and then got rewritten and then got too complex. We're very much interested in embedding Saiku reporting into the Saiku stack. Both the community and the enterprise edition will have various versions of it. The reason we haven't done it as yet is because I want to make the Saiku server pluggable before we actually add the Saiku reporting stack to the server itself, because while some people might want to use Saiku reporting, others might not. Similarly, some people might want to use Saiku reporting but not use the Saiku OLAP module. So Saiku reporting is certainly coming. We're just making sure that we get the right flexibility within the product to make sure that people still have the options to use it. So, okay, going back, I've been prodded about the schema designer. I shall crack it out. Hold on. Here we are. Is that the right file? So the schema designer, this is like a pre-release version. There is going to be a multitude of changes to the user interface, but the design aspect will remain reasonably the same. Whilst we understand that the power users and the old school people will continue to want to use hold on, click the right button. The old school users will still want to use the text editor or be able to manipulate stuff by hand. There's an awful lot of people out there who want to be able to just chuck a data source at it, drag some tables around, and view their data. They don't want to have to mess around uploading schemas. So the schema designer will allow you to either connect to an internal Mongo data source or an external JDBC data source. You then step through it, select your database and the schema within it. And then, so this is connected directly to the Mongo data source. So the cool thing about this is, as a user, I can define a Mongo data source. And then once my Mongo data structure has been defined, I can then create a schema to go on top of it. So whilst I'm in my Mongo database, I can drop a table onto the canvas. I can then drop other tables. As you can see, you get helpful hints if you make stuff go wrong. And then start to join tables together. So you build up your schema by dropping tables onto a canvas, connecting them together, defining it's Mondrian 4, so we've got measure groups in the side and attributes and hierarchies. There's for the people that are used to Mondrian 3, there's a bit to learn in terms of the way that the Mondrian 4 schemas work, but they are far more flexible, and things like measure groups will help make life easier for people. So yeah, our Mondrian schema designer is designed to allow people to create schemas quickly and easily without having to hack around in Notepad and upload stuff to the server. So like I say, what's on the screen here is a bit of a pre-release. There's going to be a bunch of changes that will come in over the next few days to make life easier for people who are creating the schemas. But the idea remains the same, where it will be drag and drop and allow people to design stuff that way. But for those of you who like Notepad, of course, like I said earlier, you can just click on the file and you can upload it directly to the schema, up to the server, and you don't have to use the schema designer at all. You're not beholden to it. If you want to create a Mongo data source, if you want to connect to your Mongo database, you can fill in your Mongo details and then define tables and rows. So Mongo has the idea of databases. It knows what a database is, but then it goes into collections and keys within that. So what Saiku does is then map Mongo keys within a collection to columns itself. And so you fill in your details and click save, and then Saiku understands the table structure that goes behind it, because this is always the case with the unstructured NoSQL data stores, is the SQL analysis tools still need a table structure to be able to understand how to query it. And so the interface here for the Mongo stuff will allow people to create that table structure without having to actually, again, create files and upload them to the server. So there you go. So I apologize again for the delay at the start. I didn't mean to turn up late. Sadly, Google was getting annoying. Again, this is a pre-release, so obviously the beta version that will come out next week. Again, we will support it, and we are obviously are happy to receive reports and issues and tweaks and stuff that people need changing. But hopefully it gives you some incentive to help drive the Saiku development, and hopefully it allows us to provide support to people that would otherwise struggle to get set up and running, and allow us to develop Saiku to be the tool that everyone keeps on asking us to be. So there you go. Thank you very much for coming to view it, and bye.